Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Episode 7, The Eye. Today's episode is written by Jason Cahill and directed by Charlotte Branston. It is 1 hour and 12 minutes long, making it the joint longest episode alongside Episode 5, Partings. I've seen some people criticizing this episode for not enough action but mostly just talking, and I don't think it really holds any weight considering the monumental occasion that just took place, and that the previous episode featured a lot of action. Our heroes need a breather for LOTR's sake, albeit they got a break, and I say that very lightly. I wouldn't exactly call it R&R, seeing as they are now in a barren wasteland surrounded by ash and smoke. But let's talk about why our heroes are now stuck in a barren wasteland, now called Mordor. It's all Theo's fault, that bitch. If he just let Adar's orcs cut his mother's throat and not reveal the location of the Keyblade, and no, I'm not talking about that Keyblade, this all could have been avoided easily. But let's talk about the actual beginning of the episode as we find Galadriel lying down. This is no time to be taking a nap, Galadriel. People are literally dying around you. But honestly speaking, she should have, or at least tried to move out of the way in the last episode. She was literally gambling with life and death, and luckily RNG chose life. So remember how we talked about Utanamo and how we wanted to desert in the last episode? Luckily for him, he no longer needs to desert as his soul chose to desert his body. And I can't believe that he chose death over returning to Numenor to his girlfriend. You know what? I really do feel like the Numenorians must really feel hard done by, seeing as every Numenorian wants to make a 180 straight back to Numenor. They got but a taste of Middle-earth and they are already like, nope, we go back right now. Back to Numenor it is. I would honestly try to swim back to Numenor just to get away from Middle-earth. And I do see where they're coming from, as Numenor is basically a small paradise and they went to Middle-earth just to be slaughtered. And honestly, this must be one of the most graphic Lord of the Rings universe has ever been when it comes to movies and series at least. I do have to say, in the previous episode, seeing Bronwyn bleed was pretty nasty. I mean, there was a lot of blood there in that one scene compared to the entire Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy combined. Staying on topic of the Numenorians, remember the dark fortune Miriel's father told her? That only darkness waits for her in Middle-earth. I didn't think that he would mean it so literal, because as of right now she is as blind as Jamie Foxx was when he pretended to be Ray Charles for a few hours. I don't think this episode has that many talking points, but one thing that I did notice was at minute 33.08, and that scene totally reminds me of a scene from The Fellowship of the Ring where Frodo, Sam, Pippin and Merry are hiding from the Nazgul. I can literally see the Peter Jackson vision oozing out of that particular scene. We obviously cannot talk about this episode without mentioning the transformation of the Southlands into Mordor, and I did say that the Southlands would one day become Mordor. I am a total genius, I know. I am totally among those exclusive people who made this prediction. My Middle-earth knowledge is unmatched. But yeah, it was fairly obvious that the Southlands were one day going to be Mordor, but for me it was just a question of how. Because how would they explain a vast field of beautiful green lands becoming nigh on unlivable? But I guess I should have seen the volcanic eruption coming from a mile away. That is the only logical explanation, and it is of course what happened. But then again, just because a volcanic erupts doesn't mean that you can't rebuild. But then again, people are not going to be fighting over lands while there are no greens to be found anywhere, so might as well abandon it, right? And by the time things would have started to eventually regrow, people would have long since moved on. And they're not going to go back to reclaim their old lands and risk their lives when they have moved on, surely. But I do wonder why nothing ever started to regrow again in Mordor, because I believe after Sauron's first defeat, Gondor took over the entrance to Mordor. Now surely with Sauron defeated and no evil present in Mordor, things would start to regrow again, unless the earth was so catastrophically spoiled that nothing can regrow again. And I do wonder what happened to Mordor after the Fellowship beat Sauron, because in the movies the volcano obviously erupts and parts of the earth literally cave in on itself, but surely Mount Doom didn't just disappear. So will Mordor just forever stand as a monument of evil or triumph, considering they won? Alright, I went way off topic there, so let's get back into the real sauce. How are they gonna play the Bronwyn may or may not be dead or die card twice in the span of 2 episodes? If they actually had the balls to kill her off, then I would have been astounded, but they didn't. Not that I mind, because I like the character. we finally get more information about the bootleg KKK following the stranger. Well, kind of, not really, but we do get some slight information about their leader. We now know that he has some sort of power, as he can clearly distinguish fire by just touching it without burning his hand, and also distribute it all over. But what does this mean? Does this give us any information on who it could be? Well, I don't have the answer, but it must be linked to the stranger in some way, because the stranger also has some sort of power over fire. And the only fire wielders I know of in Lord of the Rings are the Balrogs, the dragons, Gandalf, Eru Iluvatar, I guess since he's basically God, as well as Morgoth, who can apparently create firestorms. Oh yeah, and Saruman, considering he shot a big fireball out of his staff. And I guess Sauron, considering he will be a giant flaming eyeball at one point in time. I guess there were more than I thought, huh? And I just found out that Mordor has a coat of arms. Why they need a coat of arms, I do not know. But I guess in the Rings of Power he has that Mordor mark symbol. So I guess it's not beyond reason that he would have a coat of arms. Let's talk dwarves. King Durin is being a little bit greedy, don't you think? There's a ton of mithril to go around and he would rather see the elves die than to share. What happened to sharing is caring? Perhaps he should be inducted into the Orange Lantern Corps, though Lively's might have something to say about it. At least Durin, son of Durin, grandson of Durin, and great-grandson of Durin has huge dwarven balls to stand up to his father, the king. I mean, this just gives me huge Thorin Oakenshield vibes when he became a greedy, unlikable prick. He did of course eventually redeem himself in the end. And I recently watched Every Race in Middle-earth Explained on Wired. I believe that the man's name is Corey Olson, a self-proclaimed Tolkien expert. And apparently the dwarves were originally created as pretty unlikable and evil creatures and were followers of Melkor, I believe, and were in fact not one of the free peoples of Middle-earth. They were also very greedy, but after Thorin Oakenshield, the perception of the dwarves changed into something more positive. We have been teased with the Balrog existing for far too long now. We have seen glimpses of him. Of course, we saw him on the top of the Misty Mountains in the last episode. That was of course way back in the past, but now we finally get to see, for a brief moment only, the Balrog in present time lurking under Khazad-dûm. We of course know that the Balrog will eventually be named Durin's Bane because he will personally melt Durin like a piece of tin, but also because I imagine that he will destroy Khazad-dûm. But I do wonder one thing, and it is that I find it strange that in Lord of the Rings, when the Fellowship passes through the mines of Moria, Gimli is insulted when they call Khazad-dûm a mine.
And they call it a mine. A mine!
You would think the dwarves would have moved out of Khazad-dûm as soon as the Balrog killed Durin. I mean, Khazad-dûm was in pretty bad shape in Fellowship of the Ring, not only to the Balrog of course. I just can't imagine any dwarf wanting to live there knowing what lurks beneath their home. It did seem like Gandalf was the only one who knew that there was a Balrog in Moria. Obviously this knowledge is from the films though, not canon. They are seemingly pretty accurate to the books, with some admittedly huge changes, some necessary for a visual medium of course. But it seems that Gandalf never knew about the Balrog in the books, and we do know that Balin, one of the companions of Thorin Oakenshield, was one of those among the dead when the Fellowship passes through Moria. I just wonder why they would want to reclaim it. The only guess I have is that they must have thought that the Balrog was dead or had disappeared or moved on or something like that. Because for the Balrog to be named Durin's Bane, someone would have witnessed his unfortunate outcome, unless that this is the unofficial title of the Balrog and the Balrog killed every single witness, meaning no one was allowed to tell the story of a Balrog lurking beneath Moria, thus meaning that the dwarves want to reclaim Moria. Makes sense because the Balrog is no longer there. Of course the orcs were there, but the dwarves think they stand a pretty good chance against the orcs. But of course that didn't go as planned. But you would think that in that 1000-year gap between Khazad-dûm being destroyed and the Fellowship passing through Moria, that someone in Erebor and Khazad-dûm would have communicated. Of course it's very far away and the road to Moria is dangerous. So this is of course the penultimate episode. There's only one episode left called Alloyed. It is of course episode 8, but we have some good news. At least I think it's good news. Season 2 is now filming in the UK and I'm really excited for season 2. Hopefully it will be better. have more episodes, and hopefully people will stop talking crap about the show. No, of course people are entitled to their own opinion, but I see so much hate for the show, and there was a poll on GameSpot on what's your favorite character, and everyone's like, no one's my favorite character because everyone is unlikable, and I'm like, okay then. I mean, I personally like the characters, but if Amazon do take some feedback from the criticism of season 1, then they might make the characters more likable. Now, I don't want the cast of characters in the Rings of Power to just be cheap knocks-off of the cast of characters in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy. I want them to be their own characters. It's like, I don't want Arondir to just be a bootleg Legolas. But of course, there were many other issues that people had with season 1 that they can't really change unless they want to fire all the people of color. But that is a story for another time that I will not tell. You can probably find a ton of information about it on YouTube. Alright, I have to correct something, and it is that Sauron is not, has not, and will never be an elf, like I've always thought, and I don't know why. I guess it has something to do with Sauron having the powers of great deception and disguises. Seeing him as Anatar and elven form in Shadow of Mordor certainly didn't help. And of course the inscription on the ring that he created is an Elvish, so that didn't really help either. Sauron is actually one of the Ainur, the Holy Ones, the first and mightiest beings created by Iluvatar long before the beginning of the world. And in quotations he is also labeled as a Maya. Now the Maya or Maiar are primordial spirits created to aid the Valar in shaping the world. You of course already know this because you have read all the Middle-earth books and appendices, and you are a legend. But for those of you who don't know, each of the Maiar is associated with one or more particular Vala of similar stock, though less powerful. The wizards of Middle-earth are one of the Maiar. That is why when they die they basically get new bodies and kind of change personality, for lack of better word. We saw it when Gandalf the Grey became Gandalf the White. But as stated before, the Maiar belong to one of the Valar, and both Sauron and Saruman belong to the Valar Aule before Sauron became a servant of Morgoth. Or Melkor, who is indeed himself a Valar. He is apparently only second in power to God himself, and he's also the devil. He is basically the reason for bad things happening in Middle-earth and for evil to exist in the world. And you thought Sauron was bad. I'm not gonna lie, I've learned so much about the lore of Middle-earth by just watching those Wired videos, like for example Numenor will indeed fall and Sauron himself will influence the people there and basically turn it into a cult and make them attack the elves, whom they hate of course, as well as rebel against the Valar, basically angels of gods, or not of gods, of God, or Eru Iluvatar in this case, who helped shape the world as I mentioned before. No wonder the Valar decided to sink Numenor when they were the ones who gifted it to the Numenorians. And before we end, someone on Twitter mentioned that this is one of the only series in modern times that hasn't been touched by the sudden addiction to sex and raunchy scenes, which proves one does indeed not need sex to sell. It certainly helps though. I mean, have you seen all the YouTube yoga thumbnails?
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air.
Oh, misty eye of the mountain below, keep careful watch of my brother's souls. And should the sky be filled with fire and smoke, keep watching over Durin's sons. If they should end in fire, then we should all burn together. Watch the flames climb high into the night, calling out, Father, oh, stand by and we will watch the flames burn, burn on the mountainside. And if we should die tonight, we should all die together. Raise a glass of wine for the last time, calling out, Father, oh, prepare us, we will watch the flames burn, burn on the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky. Now I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire burning the trees, and I see fire howling souls. I see fire, blood in the breeze. I hope that you'll remember me. The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.